Hello everyone, my name is Heidi Barber. I'm the Feet Farm Manager. We're going to go through and talk about sheep shelters, and specifically we're going to kind of get into some of the considerations we followed for building our sheep shelters. We did not use a pre-made plan, so we had to go through and determine space requirements for the animals, for the shelter, and for our runs. As we go through this, we'll talk about a few of those items and we'll get into the specifics of our actual shelters. So this slide here kind of goes through space requirements for floor space, lot space, which would be pen space, how much space your feeders take up, your waters, if you're using a big tank, and then the actual water intake as far as gallon per head per day for the animals. Your rams typically need a little bit more space just because they're typically larger animals. But you can kind of go through here and based on your weights for your animals, you can figure out how much floor space, pen space you'll actually need for these guys. This is broken down by your rams, your dry ewes, your ewes with lambs, and then your pre-wean lambs, which is usually up until about 8 weeks before you wean them, depending upon your breed. And then your feeder lambs, which are those that have been weaned up until they reach processing age, if you're actually retaining them. Some things to think about if you're going to be building or trying to create shelter for your sheep. You can go and do new building. Just you need to take a look through this. There's some considerations for it. One of the big ones is for any new design is allow drainage. Typically, you're going to have a dirt floor in these shelters. You want to have the floor up high enough from the surrounding land so that everything in the barn or shelter is actually able to drain out so you don't create soupy, muddy problems that cause problems with foot rot and other health issues. Other thing, if you're actually building a shelter or barn, you really want to take into consideration any kind of equipment that you're going to be using in the barn, either for hand equipment and or mechanical equipment such as tractors. Um, very, very important consideration in any building, whether you're building a new building or if you're renovating and repurposing an existing building, is ventilation. Any kind of building used for livestock needs to be well ventilated. If you don't, you run into the problem of buildup of moisture in the building, which will cause mold and can cause respiratory problems and other diseases in the animals. So make sure that you ventilate whatever building or structure you're using. Make sure as you're going through your buildings, you want good access to water. You want to have water points in the building and recommend using automatic waters if you're actually putting them in the shelter or barn just because they take up less floor space. Feeding should be done from outside the pen, and that's just to save on you getting beat up by the animals. When renovating existing structures, um, you want to make sure it's a lot of the same considerations as when you're doing new build. It's just sometimes you may have some restrictions put on you due to the design of the existing structure. So instead of going through like on a new build and being able to put your feed aisles down the middle or on the outside edges, here, if you're renovating an existing, you may only have an option of doing it down the middle, or you may be a little offset from the middle, depending on where support beams are at. So a little bit more headaches involved with renovating existing structures, but if you've already got the existing structure, it's going to cut down a lot of your cost potentially. Again, ventilation, watering, you'll be able to have your manure management, whether you're doing it by hand or whether you've got a tractor or a skid steer that you're bringing in to actually scoop out the manure. Feed alleys, just a little bit of information on them. Some basic distance requirements for the type of item you're going to use. So if you got a tractor and a TMR, which is it's a mixed ration feeder, you want 10 to 16 foot, depending on how big of a tractor and a feeder you actually have. Silage cart, which is a hand cart. Usually you can get away with 3 to 5 feet, and then dry hay and grain, 5 foot minimum. And the other thing with your feeding alleys, your opening for the feeder should be 6 to 7 inches from the floor. Opening should be 6 to 7 inches, and they should be higher than the pen floor. So it's food for thought and some measurements in here so that if you are looking to build new, you have some ideas on your clearance requirements for different items. There are a lot of options for barns. I've got 2 of them up here just with a rough cost per square foot. You got pole barns, which you're thrifty and you talk to a lot of your electric co-ops. Sometimes they have old telephone poles that they give away, so that helps cut down on your costs. The costs that are listed up here is if you're buying all new material. Your your pole barn is 6 to 15 plus per square foot, depending on how fancy you get. They typically have a longer life, easier to control lighting, and you can insulate the ceiling. Hoop barns are $4 to $10 plus per square foot. Natural lighting. You need sidewall vents. They typically have a shorter lifespan than pole barns, and you want to build them on pony walls or half walls, which are 4 to 6 foot high, and then you want to line them north to south to capture steady airflow. Again, it's all a matter of how creative you are and exactly what you're trying to do with your shelter or barn as your actual design. For our shelters, we decided for each of the runs, which the runs are approximately 28 foot by 100 foot. We figured that we can hold 15 to 20 ewes with lambs in each of these runs. And so when we decided on our shelter to go with a 14 by 20 foot actual shelter, and they're approximately 5 foot tall on the back and a 5.5 foot tall on the front, which gives approximately 280 square foot of living space. We say each can shelter up to 17.5 dry ewes, 14 ewes with lambs, or 28 feeder lambs, or 9.3 rams. Yes, decimals you can round up, but that gives you an approximate of how many animals we can hold in each of these. And the top-down view, if you're looking at it, that's basically how we've got it set up. We have our 2 outside openings on the east and west wall. And they're approximately 4 foot wide for the openings. And then through the middle, because the way we built these being modular, we have a wall down the middle, and we have a opening in the middle that's approximately 4 foot wide. This also helps us if we're trying to catch a particular sheep. We can put a temporary fence or gate across any of these openings so that we can run the animals in and sort the animals out to the one that we actually need. So a little bit of help there for being able to work our sheep plus provide them the shelter. And by offsetting those openings, you don't have the wind just whistling Dixie right through the shelter. It helps block it some and help block some of the rain that'll potentially come in. Side view, the white area here is actually open air, so that allows ventilation through. And then what you can't see because I didn't do the front and back view is this area here is also open. So basically this top of the wall here is the same height all the way around. And that's just so it allows ventilation for the animals. And from doing the actual construction out here on the nice scorcher, 80, 90, 100 plus days, if you go into the shelter with it laid out like this, you can actually, it's a noticeable temperature difference from out in the sun to inside the shelter. One of the things when you're doing your roofing and siding, there's a lot of different materials you can use. You've got corrugated tin, metal shingles, wood shingles, standing seam metal roofing, clay tile, concrete tiles, slate shingles. It's really what material you feel like using, how permanent your structure is, how much you're willing to spend. Some of these get a little pricey. We ended up going with corrugated tin. Just the biggest thing, and I've got the picture down here, which illustrates it, is whenever you are laying in your roofing or your siding, you always start at the bottom and work up. That way the tile that's, as you can see in here, as I get my mouse cooperate, as you can see, this tile sits on top of the one below it. And that's so that as it rains, the water is running off and not running under, which will then potentially cause it to leak into the structure. Same thing when you're doing your siding. You want to start at the bottom and work to the top so that if you've got any overlap of material, the one on top is on the overlapping the bottom one so that it runs off and not down into the wall. Same thing with siding. It's really up to you what you want to use. There's a variety of materials for this as well. And again, a variety of price ranges to go with these variety of items. So it's going to depend upon what your budget is, how fancy you feel like making your shelters or barns. You got corrugated tin, vinyl siding, wood siding, composite siding. Really, the imagination is the limit on what you can actually put up here. And also how long your shelter will last. We went with corrugated tin again on ours. And a lot of that is because we had a friend of ours that had to move. And he had 5 horse shelters that we tore down because they couldn't stay on the property. And we reclaimed a lot of the wood and corrugated tin that was used on those. Helped cut our cost by quite a bit. I'm going to go into this a little bit more here in just a minute, but here's a basic list of tools. And again, it depends upon how fancy you get and the materials you're actually using. You may have some additional tools that are needed based upon the materials that you select to use to build your shelter or barn. Clamps are nice if you don't have extra helpers. We built our shelters using 2 people. So the clamps came in handy on some of the items as we were standing up and attaching the siding to the shelter. All right. So out of our build, this is our list of materials that were actually used in it. Total cost, had we actually purchased everything, would probably put it at about $1,500 per shelter. Because of the use of reclaimed materials, our actual cost for 3 shelters ended up at $1,000. We would probably been about $3,000 to $4,500 if we'd actually bought everything brand new.